although the organisation was very astutely called Communities, actually its first 2 years or its first 18 months, it's a singular community.
Yes.
It's the residential rehabilitation recovery community. The second community that gets involved with it is then the external recovery community. So that's particularly AGRO and some other bits. So you start by securing the internal residential recovery community, because that was a transformation. And even if you start from scratch, you'd still have to do the same thing. You'd have to have that one foundation correct first. Is there enough recovery in the house? Yes. Okay. Right. Let's invite the recovery that's around the house into the house, for want of a better word. And then when we get to that stage, how do we really encourage the house to go out to the community and the wider community to come into the house? So that's really the third stage in a way. And it happens two different ways, really. Number one is, it happens with individuals and individual acts of giving rather than whole house giving. The really big whole house giving happened, as you know, in the story, perhaps through COVID, but it's beginning to happen already. But lots of individuals are going out and doing projects and stuff like that and all that sort of thing with the community. But all of a sudden we've got non-recovery people finding out what's going on and coming in and being and for recovery communities to survive, Marcus and I talk a lot about this. The recovery community, it can't survive on its own. This is really important. It can't, in the broadest sense now, recovery community, in order to thrive, forget survival, in order to thrive, it must have a recovery community, but it must have a whole group of people who are friends of recovery as well. So these are the people who have not necessarily been through recovery, may or may not know quite a lot about drugs and alcohol use, but actually want to support this group, believe in the group, believe in the process of change, but also believe in the value of peer support. So it needs so also what happens at Penryn is that there also starts to become some friends of Penryn as well, friends of recovery as well. And so the wider community starts to come in, but yes, absolutely. Penryn also starts to give out to the community as well. And that becomes really important. And that starts most immediately and explodes during COVID with its most immediate community. Not about selecting the community. Penryn is based on the outskirts of as you well know, it's based on the outskirts. So anyone listening to the film, I keep referring to Penryn. Penryn is the name of the house. It used to be called Penryn Youth Hostel. It's not a place, it's the name of the house. And it's named after the big house that's just across the road of it, which is called Penryn Castle, and goes all the way back to the Victorian state of being owned by Lord Penryn. It's probably really important for our wider audience to know all that little bit of the story.
I forgot all that history.
Yeah. So it's Penryn Youth Hostel in the shadow of Penryn House, which all to do with the Victorian Lord Penryn and everything being called Penryn Estate. What became important is Penryn is situated between the town centre of Bangor and then a particular estate on the outside called Maesgyrchen, and it's the estate that the community Penryn, it gets on the business of getting involved with and working with its neighbour. Doesn't shy from that. And sometimes I think, and that's also about what is the difference between even a residential recovery community and residential rehabs, is the residential rehabs often feel closed from their immediate neighbouring community. They feel they've got this very closed feel, and that works for people. And I think the exception is when residential rehabs are actually what Rowdy would of course refer to as genuine therapeutic communities, and I think we have those in Europe in a way in which we don't necessarily have in the UK. So yeah, the whole purpose of it being residential recovery communities, a good word is that part of James's vision was this permeability. It's not an enclosed thing, but it seeps in and out. Yes. And then COVID just completely changed the whole experience in a way. It exploded the profile of North Wales recovery with its community, but then the size of its footprint in the community, because during COVID, if you just said it, if you strip it back to kind of Daily Mail stigma speak language, if it was in a tabloid newspaper, it would have gone, it would have just had a headline, something like "Drug addicts spend a pandemic lockdown feeding the older people in the community." That's the kind of paraphrase of it, which of course most people would just go, "Now that doesn't make any sense to me. Sorry, isn't it usually the older people that feed the drug addicts or whatever else?" But of course, the unique thing about COVID, of course, was all these people isolated; they couldn't go anywhere. So it became a very unique, and really there was thousands and thousands of hot meals that were delivered, as well as food parcels and everything else, and it led to an involvement in the food bank, and ultimately it led to a conversation with someone in the local health board who wanted to talk about, could this happen on a bigger, a higher community profile? And all of those conversations ultimately led to the cafe and Boyd Dar being established.